Thank you for inviting me to give this talk. It's really wonderful to be able to share my research with the broader audience than the usual scientists that go to conferences and the very few people that read the papers that we publish. So it's it's really great. I will tell you about work that I have been doing on 2 study systems. And before I start, I would just like to give you a little overview about the topic that has been absolutely fascinating for me and during most of my career, which is cooperation among animals, and which is the basis of what I'll be telling you about tonight. As I think everyone in this audience know, we all know that cooperation is really widespread in nature, and animals cooperate for all sorts of things, to hunt, to build shelter, to fight predators. But in cooperating, they manage to achieve more than individually they would be able to achieve. But cooperation is also a very interesting evolutionary problem, because cooperation brings benefits to the group, but it's costly to the individual. So in this photo, you see sociable weavers trying to defend their nest from a Cape cobra that is interested in eating chicks and eggs. And if enough weavers come together, we have seen them managing to knock down a snake, especially if it is a small one. But each individual does this at a cost to itself. There is obviously the cost that the snake might be able to catch one of the weavers. So why should individuals cooperate, and why shouldn't they just step back, let the others do the work, but not take the risks themselves? And this is a problem that has been fascinating for generations of biologists, and we are still trying to find answers for this. There are 2 main types of explanations. One is kin selection. If individuals are helping their close kin, then they can benefit themselves from those cooperative acts, because they share most of the genes, their genes with their close kin. So helping close kin is a little bit like reproducing in the sense of spreading one's genes into the population. But individuals can also help non-kin and even different species. So we have other types of explanations, which are direct benefits that individuals get from cooperating. So there's several different examples. For example, here you see this meerkat looking for predators. If it sees one, it will warn its group mates. But this individual will be the first to see the predator, so it can run for cover. So it's doing both. It's helping itself. It's helping its group mates. There's a reciprocity, literally you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I won't get into the details of that, but it's just to give you an idea of the types of explanations that we find for the evolution of cooperation. I have been quite interested in a specific type of cooperative behavior, which is cooperative breeding. I've been studying this for many years. Cooperative breeding is illustrated here by these fairy wrens. It's a type of reproduction when you have the breeding pair assisted by additional individuals. So here we see these superb fairy wrens. We can say this will be the father and the mother of the nestling, but there is a third individual that comes and helps to feed the chicks in the nest. These helpers are usually offspring of the breeding pair, but not always. Sometimes it can be more distant relatives or even unrelated birds helping. of course, people have been trying to understand what are the benefits, what do these individuals stand to gain from helping others, even if close relatives, to reproduce, rather than going on and reproducing independently. And so there's been many studies to try to understand what are the, in our search for what are the benefits and what causes this behavior, and how has this behavior evolved. One of the things that we have noticed is that the cooperative breeding, it doesn't occur everywhere on the planet. As you see in this photo, there's a geographic bias in the distribution of cooperative breeding. So you see here in red you have a higher prevalence of cooperative species in the tropics of Africa, Australia, Southeast Asia, and Central South America. And it's interesting that this matches the areas of the planet where there is higher variation in weather between years. So the bottom map shows variation in rainfall between years, and we see that in red, again, the areas where there's higher variation in rainfall, they more or less coincide with areas that where there's more cooperative breeding. And so this higher variation in rainfall between years, that means that species in these areas will experience great differences between years in their in breeding conditions. So these are two photos of my sociable weaver study site near Kimberley, and you see on the left it's a dry year, it's a dry summer, low rainfall, so everything is quite dry, the grass gets a bit sparse, there's not a lot of invertebrates. And on the right, it's a very good rainfall year, so in rainfall summer when the birds are breeding, so lots of grass, lots of insect activity, so lots of food for the birds. So this has led to the idea that in this cooperative breeding species, for this cooperative breeding species, it would be quite advantageous if you're in this area and there's a very dry breeding season, to have helpers, because they can help to buffer the effects of this low condition. So if there's less food around, more birds searching for food would be able to find more food than just the pairs. And so so this could provide an explanation for this geographical distribution of cooperative breeding that I showed you, helping us to understand the evolution of cooperative breeding. But this observation also created the expectation that these cooperative species are more resilient in the face of extreme weather, so droughts and hot spells, and so yes, so more resilient in the face of climate change. So I've been looking into this question with these two study systems that I'll be talking about today. I will first start by telling you about my research on sociable weavers. And I wanted to say that this is obviously by no means work that I've done by myself. I have collaborated for a long time with Claire Doutrelan. She's been my very good friend and collaborator for more than 20 years now. And we've been lucky to have an amazing group of students and assistants and postdocs working with us and producing the results that I'll be telling you about today. The sociable weavers are endemic to Southern Africa. They are associated with the arid savannas of the Kalahari region. They are best known for the amazing nest structures that they build communally on trees. As you see here, they can be absolutely massive and hosts several hundreds of birds that live permanently in these structures. So they reproduce, but they also stay there in winter. So they occupy these structures all year round. This is a photo of a colony seen from below. So they have independent nest chambers, as you see these entrances here on the little dark dots there, the entrances to the chambers. They don't link inside. They're independent chambers that are used by usually a breeding pair with or without their helpers. It can be just a pair, but it's often a family living in one of these chambers. Sometimes larger families will occupy 2 or 3 nearby chambers. And we know that birds in nearby chambers, they're more closely associated than they are with the other birds from other sides of the colony. So there's really a multi-level structure in these colonies, but then the whole colony lives and forages together. So a very interesting social system. So in these societies, in these colonies, there's both kin and non-kin. So you will have the family groups, but also other birds that are not really their relatives. Because they're resident, they are highly trackable. They're very easy to study, to follow throughout the year. And they are highly cooperative. So for our interest in cooperation, they're really a fantastic study system. So they build their nest cooperatively. They come together to mob predators, to watch out for predators, and they have this cooperative breeding system with the helping at the nest, which is what I'll be focusing on today. We studied them at Benfontein Nature Reserve. This is a De Beers property close to Kimberley in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. And we have been studying these birds for a long time. I started studying them for my PhD, which started in 1998. But then I stopped for a few years, went away, but then we went back. And since 2010, we have detailed data on and continuous data since. But I wanted to mention that the birds have been marked at this site since 1993, so it makes them one of the longest running studies of individually marked birds in Southern Africa, maybe even in Africa. It was started by Mark Anderson, who is now CEO of BirdLife South Africa, but started bringing these birds out of interest and to bring people to the field. And that has been really precious to understand things about the longevity of these birds, the movements, the factors that affect their survival, and so on. We used to study 15 colonies. We were down to 7 due to fires, and I will come back to this at the end of my talk. But the results that I'm presenting here are based on these 15 colonies, which was about 500 individually marked birds that we used to have. So this long-term study means every year catching the birds before the breeding season. They're all individually marked, as you see on this bird here down on the right. This bird, all birds have an individual color combination. In this bird, the longer ring, yellow ring that you see here, has a PID tag. So in addition to being able to visually identify the birds individually, we are also able to track them when they come to automatic feeding stations that we have in the reserve, and that allow us to learn more about their social associations, which that will be for another talk another time. Catching them every year means having a big group of people helping, and it would be absolutely impossible without that, because we catch all birds from a colony at the same time in the nets. So we need a lot of people to extract them from the nets, to process them quickly, to try to release them as soon as possible. Processing them means taking a blood sample, which we use for genetic and for sexing analysis, since these birds are sexually monomorphic, you can't tell male and female apart. We take measures to body mass, their size, to look at estimate body condition. We mark them with these rings. We ring them with the color combinations. If the birds have been caught before but lost one or more rings, we replace them so that they're ready for the breeding season. When the breeding season starts, they're all nicely ringed, and we can do our work and follow them and know what they're up to. So during the breeding season, what we do is we monitor in detail the reproduction, reproductive investment and reproductive success. So we visit the colonies every 3 days. We look for new clutches, we record clutch size. Then on the hatching date, we look at hatching success. We follow the chicks during their growth to measure them, to mark them, to give them an individual color combination at the end of the fledging stage, the nestling stage. And we also record the chambers with the video cameras, so to look at the individual, the identity of the individuals attending each nest. So like that, we know if it is a nest with only helpers, with only the breeding pair, or the breeding pair with helpers. These video cameras allow us to obtain images, as you see here. And when the birds fly in and out, we can read their unique color combination. And so we have their individual history in terms of whether they were helping or not, whether they were reproducing, how much they were investing in helping or in reproduction. So everything in a lot of detail. But going back to the question of whether cooperative species are more resilient and in the face of extreme weather, I will tell you about the work we did on reproductive output and how this is influenced by climatic variables, and whether the helpers can do something to counter the effects of poor breeding conditions. We started this, I first looked at this question during my PhD, and I only had 2 years of good field data to use for this. And I looked at fledging survival and reproductive output. I looked at the effects of rainfall and the effects of helpers, and whether there was an interaction. What you see in this figure, here on the y-axis, you have the fledging mass, so the mass of the chicks before they leave the nest, and you have rainfall on the axis. And if you look at the left side of the figure, you see what happens when rainfall is low. So rainfall here in the previous month before the chicks fledge was below 50 millimeters. And these two lines indicate and the values here indicate the mass of the chicks that were raised by pairs alone, and chicks that were raised by pairs that were assisted by helpers. And what we see here is that the chicks raised by pairs with helpers are about 1.5 grams heavier, so when conditions are poor. But when conditions are good, there's really not much of a distinction. And you know, everyone, the mass is stable for the groups, and the pairs increase a little bit with rainfall. But so there is some evidence for the mass that the chicks might do well when conditions are bad, if they are assisted by helpers. There were similar results found for superb starlings in Kenya. They also found that the reproductive output was more stable when there were helpers. You know, they didn't suffer so much with the poor conditions. And so, yes, these initial results really fed this expectation that social species are doing better when conditions are bad. But we, at the Sociable Weavers project, we really wanted to look at this again using longer term data, because 2 years is obviously not so much. So we had a postdoc working with us, Pietro D'Amelio, who looked at again these same results. He and analyzed again these parameters with more data. He did more complete analysis. He also looked at the effects of high temperatures and how nest predation was influenced by climatic variables and by the presence of helpers. And you might have noticed in the previous slides that we have something weird wrapped around these trees. And some of the trees, not all, but some of the trees were with Sociable Weaver colonies, we wrap them with the tree trunks with the plastic. It's like heavy duty cling film. And this prevents the snakes from climbing. So we've been running this natural experiment where we exclude or at least decrease predation in some colonies, but allow snakes to climb in other colonies. This is quite effective. It doesn't prevent them. It's not 100% results against snakes, but it does decrease substantially the predation rate. So Pietro found that both rainfall and maximum temperature were important predictors of brood fate. And he also found an interesting effect of temperature on predation probability. So in this figure, what you see is how predation probability increases with mean maximum temperature. And the analysis was split for groups of 2, so when it's only pairs alone, groups of 4, which is pairs with 2 helpers, and groups of 6, pairs with 4 helpers. And you see that regardless of group size, because everything here is overlaps, predation probability increases with temperature. So when it's cooler, snakes are not as active. So it's something that we could expect. Pietro also found that a positive effect of helpers when temperatures are low or medium, but when temperatures increase, everyone, the reproductive output, and in this case, the probability of fledging a full clutch decreases for everyone, whether there are helpers or not. Everyone suffers. The fledging success decreases markedly above a certain temperature. These 2 different graphs are for the natural colonies that were not protected from predators, and the ones that were protected from predators. So in one, we are looking at when we exclude the snakes, the predators, we are looking at the effect, more directly at the effects of the temperature on the fledglings, not via the increase in predation rate. So I just didn't mention, but the result was the same for rainfall. So the graphs here are for temperature, but we observe the same with rainfall. The helpers can help, but we see a difference when the rains are good. But when rainfall is really poor, having helpers, it's not enough. Everyone suffers, whether they have helpers or not. So in Sociable Weavers, our long-term data does not really provide strong support for the hypothesis, this buffering hypothesis of associated with the presence of helpers. But I wanted to say that the helpers do help in many ways. So they do help when conditions are not so extreme, so not so hot, not so dry. They also help the parents in the sense that they work less when they are assisted by helpers. These helpers do bring more food and allow the parents to decrease their own feeding rate a little. They also contribute to brooding when the chicks are small, to clean the nest and to nest building. And the females also, we found that females also had better survival when they were assisted by helpers, especially young females. Yeah, it's just these buffering effects and the harsh conditions that we didn't find. But I was really keen to look at this in another system, and I was fortunate to become involved with the long-term study on the southern ground hornbills that has been run by the Fitzpatrick Institute since 2000. And so the hornbills are these very iconic birds that most of you know. They nest in natural cavities in old, very large old trees. But fortunately, they take to these nest boxes as well. So yeah, it's possible to study them quite easily. It just requires climbing tall ladders and just doing field work on the top of very high ladder. But the ground hornbills, there's two species of ground hornbills. The southern ground hornbill is the one you see in orange here. And we have been studying them in the greater Kruger area. So it's at the Associated Private Nature Reserves in Hoedspruit. And before I continue, I must say that all the work here really has been conducted by these two amazing students that I've been lucky to work with, Kyle Middleton and Carrie Hickman. Kyle is actually no longer a student. He graduated earlier this year. He's now Dr. Middleton, and Carrie is working towards her PhD degree. So just a little bit more about the ground hornbills. They are also cooperative breeders with these helpers at the nest. They live in groups of 2 to 11 individuals. It can be just the breeding pair, but they more commonly are in groups. There's usually only one female per group and several male helpers. They are incredible in that they can live up to 50, 60 years old, and that is in the wild. So very, very impressive longevity. They are very large and they need very large territories, about 100 square kilometers, and they have their iconic vocalizations that travel far and allow them to mark their and defend their territories. They live in more mesic savannas than the sociable weavers. It's still relatively dry, but definitely more mesic than the Kalahari. And they are what we could call faunivores. They eat animals, anything really, from invertebrates to relatively large vertebrates, as you see here. They are also very interesting in that they have this slow development, and so we can age them more or less accurately based on the development of the red pouch. And male, and you can tell the male and female from the female has this darker coloration on the throat. They take a long time to reach maturity, 7-8 years to become a fully developed male. And their groups, they can, so there's the alpha pair, the breeding male and female, and they have retained young with them, so young from previous years, but also unrelated helpers are sometimes observed. So other males that immigrate into the group. But yes, it's a single adult female. They are endangered in South Africa, and yes, and internationally it's slightly better, but it's their status is not great because of their habitat requirements. They require very large territories. They require areas with old trees where with cavities, and they have also suffered from secondary poisoning that is in the environment, and in some cases persecution as well. So they have been declining, and this is what their former range used to be, and what the range is now. Yes, so Kyle, for his PhD, a part of his PhD was looking at this question of how the environmental conditions influence reproductive efforts and provisioning efforts and reproductive outcomes, and whether the helpers can do something to counterbalance the effects of adverse conditions. So looking at the climatic factors, again, temperature and rainfall, social factors, but also in this species, life history factors. So whether the group members' age also plays a role. First, looking at provisioning, we were expecting that the adults would work harder. They're more experienced, and they have, and of course the breeding pair has a higher interest in the nest. And indeed, we found that the males contribute more than the adult males more than the subadults, and the contribution of the juveniles is not very important. But also Kyle found that the provisioning effort decreases with temperature. Here on the left, you see what happens during incubation stage. The effect here is the incubation stage is early in the season. Temperatures aren't as high, but here you see on the right the early nestling stage when temperatures are higher, and you can see the decrease, very marked decrease in provisioning rates with the temperature, and this is regardless of group size. So again, there was no counterbalancing effect, buffering effect of the helpers. It's conditions get bad and everyone works less. It's just yes, it doesn't matter if the group is bigger. They all suffer. And then Kyle also looked at the effect on the reproductive outcomes. So using long-term data that was available since 2000, and the effects of temperature and rainfall, and again, the social and life history factors. And what we could see is that the probability of breeding increases with the number of juveniles and subadults, which was interesting, but it probably means that if birds have juveniles around, they were successful before, so it's a good group or a good territory. But the probability of breeding also increases with winter rainfall. So this is a summer rainfall area, but if the winter was not so dry, if there was a little bit of rainfall in winter, there's higher chances that the birds will reproduce. And again, this effect of maximum temperature on chick mass. So the fledglings, if temperatures were high during their nestling period, they will fledge with lower mass. And we know from studies not on these birds, but it's a common result in studies in birds that when they fledge with the lower mass, their chances of surviving are also lower. But again, in both cases, there was no clear buffering effect of helpers. So having helpers didn't increase the probability that birds would breed after a dry winter. and having helpers wouldn't affect the chick mass when and this relationship between chick mass and temperature. So from these two systems, the sociable weavers and the ground hornbills, we don't really find the evidence for the effect we were expecting to see, that the having helpers mitigates the role of these adverse environmental conditions. And I put this here, this additional image on the right from a study, but there's actually been more now than a couple of studies on pied babblers. This was Amanda Burns' PhD research conducted with Susie Cunningham and Amanda Ridley at the Fitzpatrick Institute as well, and they also found very similar effects of or lack of effects of helpers in countering these adverse conditions, so dry and hot conditions. So where does this leave us with this hypothesis that this unpredictability between years and variation between years favors the evolution of cooperative breeding? It's of course too early to tell. We definitely need a better understanding of this possible mitigating role of helpers against adverse breeding conditions. So we need more studies from more species and long-term studies. And it would be really good to see at the end of an individual's life having helpers and not having helpers, and having had more of these very dry years, if maybe at the end of an individual's life that effect could be picked up. But I'm almost finishing, but to say that the effects of adverse climatic effects, they're not only manifest directly through droughts and hot conditions. They also have they affect other things, and one of the things that we've been seeing increasing is the frequency and intensity of fires. So I mentioned earlier that we used to have 15 colonies at Benfontein, and now we have 7. This was a fire, very destructive fire 2 years ago, and this weekend we had another fire, and we lost another colony. So this photo was taken on Monday after the fire from Saturday. And these are the sociable weaver colonies we had at Benfontein in up until September 2021, when we had a very wet summer, the year before, and we had very high grass, so the grass was very thick, very dense. And a fire came through in September 2021 and destroyed most of 2/3 of our sociable weaver colonies and others in the area that we were not monitoring. So it was really devastating for us and for the birds. It caused massive immigration into the surviving colonies. So we didn't lose all the birds in our population because they attempted to immigrate into the surviving colonies, but that led to very marked increase in the levels of aggression among the birds at the colonies. So for a few weeks, it was quite intensive, the interactions among the birds, especially at roosting time, because these sociable weavers, they roost in these individual chambers that I showed at the beginning of my talk. So for access, there was a lot of competition for access to these chambers. And so that was an additional stress factor for the birds. So in addition to the losing their colonies, not going through the fire, not having enough food for a while until things start to grow again, there was this extreme social stress. So this raises lots of important questions as well. The effects of these events for these birds. And for animals in general, because we know that unfortunately this really is increasing. We are particularly interested in whether the social associations help coping with these extreme events. So we have a master student at the moment, Mariana Souza, from the University of Porto. She's analyzing the data from the fire 2 years ago. And we hope to investigate things like whether being in for example, in a family group helps when you're forced to move to another colony, helps with the chances of settling in the colony or surviving simply. So there's some important questions arising from this that we are hoping to tackle. It's very sad to have to study things like this. It's also useful and interesting, but yes, these are strange times, I think. What we're living at the moment. But with this, I will finish by thanking everyone in both teams, the social weaver and the Southern Brown Hornbill team. Again, it's been amazing to work with everyone throughout these years, and definitely the work. This is a long-term effort, so it's only possible through the help of so many people, so having so many helpers. There's contacts here. With both projects have a web page. If you want to find out more, get in touch, please do. And yeah, with this, I thank you for your attention, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Rita, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I want to say thank you, and I'm going to do a simple little quote. Great knowledge often comes from the humblest of origins. I'm going to omit that and say the humblest of places. It rhymes so close to home. Kimberley is where I was born, bred, and went to school. So I know Benfontein very well. And those photos brought back really wonderful memories as a child. I was also there in the fire 2 years ago that you explained. It was horrific. And I don't think the audience actually knows what a colossal area was burned down. It really was atrocious. But thank you very much for a wonderful talk and incredible science, and making it so approachable and so understandable to such a wonderful broad audience. It's wonderful to know that there are people doing really hardcore science, and it always it plucks my heartstrings to listen to a really good, proper, well done science. So thank you very
so much.
Beautiful pictures. Going to hand over to Johan to conduct the question and answer session. Johan, screen's all yours.
Thank you very much, Ruan. I saw that the questions are already rolling in the chat, but now please feel free to raise your hand or draw our attention. If you want to ask a question, you can ask your questions live, or you can post them in the chat. As always, we love to hear your questions. Since I don't see any hands yet on the screen, I'm going to start with the first question in the chat. So from Sibyl Rietmiller: so sad to hear that the bird colonies in the research were halved by fire, probably due to climate change. Is this a continuing trend in your research?
So it's I think now we have to say that it is a continuing trend. When I started, and for many years, fires were just not an issue at Benfontein. So I will talk more about Benfontein, but in this type of open savanna, if there was a fire, it would burn through, but it was not really. So for years, it was really not something that was part of the way I was thinking about the birds and the system they were living in. And as I said, 2 years ago, following a very, very wet summer, that totally changed the conditions for the birds. It was, I was there in that summer. I was out in the field, and it was impressive. The grass was so tall and so thick. You could see that the birds were really struggling. Even in the summer, when you think there's lots of green grass, there should be lots of insects, but the birds were struggling. We were often finding them on the roads, which suggested that which was an open, the dirt roads, which was an open area. So it was changing their environment, and then it dried over winter, and the fire went in, and it was just incredibly destructive. And after that, we've had 2 more wet. So when I say wet, is very wet summers. We had 3 La Nina years in a row, which bring higher rainfall in Southern Africa, and that is unusual, to have 3 La Ninas in a row, and many people were putting it down to climate change. And now again, so the grass now wasn't as thick and tall as it was 2 years ago, but still, it was dense. And I think that that caused another destructive fire. So yes, I think climate change is definitely increasing.
Thank you, Rita. Then turning to Emlyn. Emlyn, thanks once again for joining us from the USA. Please go ahead with the question.
Yeah, thank you, Johan. And just a compliment before a question or a comment. Rita, we don't know each other, but I'm very taken by the gentleness of your presentation. You exude empathy, I feel, for the wildlife that you're studying up close and personal. I'm very taken by that. I think Ruan's comments sort of were expressing that to say. But my question is, humans have come reluctantly to accept the degree of anthropomorphism, to use that term, that we spot in the behavior of other animals, and then we say, well, they're like us. I think often, we should turn the table and say we inherited this from them, in an evolutionary wildlife to human life context. And so, when animals show cooperation, which we then understand, we observe, understand, and try to interpret, in many cases, I guess I'm just saying the same thing another way, we end up being surprised because we didn't expect it. But in fact, I wonder if you have comments about how we should not be surprised. And in fact, we are the species that have, in many ways, through the ages of evolution, have inherited from non-human species many of these traits.
Well, we certainly are all connected by evolution, the tree of life. We do share a common root, and then we all go down our own evolutionary path, but with a common root. So yes, definitely, I think we have many things in common, and I think we have more in common with animals, even with small birds, than what we realize, and or what most people are happy to accept, maybe. But definitely, I think we do share a lot of. Then, of course, we in many ways we are also very, very different. But we find repeatedly common patterns of cooperation, even how we respond to different situations. Across species, we find a lot of common patterns. So even I mean, yes, because I'm so interested in cooperation. So there's lots of examples, but even I'm thinking of things like cleaner fish that you wouldn't, and their hosts, that you wouldn't think, why should we, how could we relate to them? But they do things like responding to the presence of an audience. They are more cooperative if they are being watched than if they're not. So things that we also do, we humans also do. So yes, definitely we share a lot, and I don't think we should be surprised by that.
So no, I'll just sort of add, if I may, that it seems then the degree to which this is what's happening in reality, that we're inheriting, the term anthropomorphism is misleading, isn't it? We sort of rationalize that we're seeing human-like behaviors in animals as opposed to sort of recognizing that we've inherited those behaviors.
Yes, I think sometimes people do make that interpretation, and when in fact I think yes, that we all share that common root, yeah, and came from that.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Emlyn. That was a very interesting observation. Then a somewhat related question from Sandra Hardy. What determines if the bird is a helper? Are they just birds without mates?
That's a very good question. It's, and I can't give you a straight answer. That's a big topic of research. Lots of people are still researching that after many years, and in coming up with partial answers. But it's hard to give a full answer. But what we know is that the helpers, typically but not always, are offspring from the breeding pair. So in a lot of these cooperative breeding species, even the small passerines, they are species with I'm not going to say they're long-lived, but relatively long-lived, like the sociable weavers. They can, well, we have extreme cases of birds living for 16 years, 14, 16 years. There's the highest longevity. But it's common that a bird will live 4, 5, 6 years. And so we have some evidence that if the birds that live relatively long lives, it's more advantageous for them to start reproducing later in life as well, because there's a cost to start reproducing very early in life. You're less experienced, to find food and for yourself and to keep yourself in good condition, but also feed your offspring. It's, if you have the time, if you have your life expectancy allows you to wait a little, it's more beneficial. So this is part of the answer, that these birds, it might be more beneficial for them to stay with their parents, and then they see their siblings in the nest and they help, than to go on and breed independently. But there's something very interesting in addition to this, and which is something we've always suspected. And actually, the fire from 2 years ago gave us some elements more to think about this. As I said, we typically have the offspring helping their parents, but not only. And after the fire, what we saw, there was lots of birds were forced to disperse into other colonies. So they moved to other colonies where they didn't have any relatives. And we still found that lots of those birds, lots of those immigrants were helping other birds with their breeding attempts. So it was not only the offspring helping their parents, they were helping totally unrelated birds, even, strangers that they had not seen before. Of course, I'm sure that, before they started helping, they came together like with some sort of social association. And then they help those other birds. So it seems that there is there are additional reasons for helping, and that is something that actually at the Sociable Weaver project we are very, very interested in. And we at the moment actually we got a grant to study this specifically. It's these direct benefits that individuals get from helping. So even strangers or previously unknown birds.
Thanks, Rita.
So, yeah, sorry, not a very complete question, but answer. But yeah, that's what we have for now.
Wow. Modi, please unmute. Go for it.
Hi, Rita. Thanks very much. It's a very interesting talk. I was just kind of thinking to myself, there's almost a toss-up between cooperative and being competitive, and there's a I hope I'm going to put this across properly, but where you've got a bigger family there's more mouths to feed with the same amount of resources. And almost having the cooperation, possibly having a big crew, means there's more mouths to feed and you're sharing amongst yourselves. And that needs to be sort of weighed up against having fewer people or fewer mouths to feed, not people, but fewer mouths to feed in the colony. And I'm just kind of interested. I mean, other bird species, for example, are very aggressive with chasing their young away and getting them away quickly. So, what, is that something to do with the size of the birds, or I was just wondering if there's anything that you can maybe add to that. Thanks.
Yeah, that is a really, really good point. And actually a lot of people working on these topics of cooperative breeding have made that point. Yes, there's this help, but there's also competition, as you say, more mouths to feed. So what we think, I mean, again, and this is not a definite and a complete answer, but what we think is that the cooperation evolves when the conditions, or this type of cooperation, this cooperative breeding, when the conditions also allow it. So when the resources are stable and abundant enough to allow the groups to persist, so that the parents don't have to chase the offspring away because there's no longer resources in the territory. So we see that, for example, with some European birds, and it's relatively well studied in things like blue tits and gray tits, where they might actually chase the young from the territory after a while. And this is a very seasonal environment, and so after that peak in spring, with the beginning of summer, the resources decline quite markedly, which could mean that then there's not enough food for everyone, and that's why they need to chase the young in some cases. Whereas if you remember the map that I showed with the distribution of cooperative breeding, in most of the tropics, and even in southern temperate regions, it's not we don't have that sharp peak and decline in resources. Things are more stable throughout the year. So there's so there's the pattern is different, and maybe that's what allows more the offspring to stay with their parents, and then leading to this situation of helping when they have chicks again.
Thanks very much, Rita.
Okay.
Thanks, Rita. You give us some comprehensive answers. Really love that. A lot that we can learn from these birds. Another question from Doug Newman in the chat. Is there a correlation in group song vocalization and cooperative breeders? Is it only cooperative breeders that sing together as a group?
Yeah, lots of interesting questions from the audience. It's yes, singing together in a coordinated way, I think, yes. Cooperative breeders, I mean, you have species that do duets, of course, the male and the female, but I think group vocalizations, they, as far as I know, they are now, actually, sorry, they might not. So as far as I know, cooperative breeders, yes, and you have some species that are group living and even family living without getting all the way into the cooperative breeding step. And those species that live in those more or less permanent groups, they have coordination of songs. So I don't know if there is another group living or any group living species that coordinates songs like that without the cooperative, the cooperative part. Sorry, I know that the cooperative breeders do, and that the social structure of species does influence the complexity of the vocalizations as well. So that is a really fascinating field of research as well.
Indeed. Well, if there are any birders and experts in the field, in the room at the moment, please let us know if you have additional insights to that question. In the meantime, another question from Sandra Hardy: do the chambers have parasites?
Not the chambers, no. The birds clean the chambers quite nicely. So no, I mean, we sometimes there are parasites on the birds, so especially the chicks. There's usually a time of the year when the chicks have quite a few parasites, but they don't. Well, when I say they clean the chambers, there must be some small ones or eggs that might hide in the straw at the bottom of the nest. But social weavers clean their nests quite nicely. So yeah, so I don't think, it's not like in some other cavity nesters where you have there's a part of the nest that stays from one year to the next, and it can harbor lots of parasites. Yeah, the social weaver nests are very, very nice and clean.
Thank you very much. Then I just want to read a comment from Prof. William Bond in the chat. Very interesting birds, biology and science. Fires, 1 or 2 in a decade or two, must have been the norm for thousands of years, worrying direct trends in response to high temperatures.
I saw that comment from William. Yeah, thanks so much. I would actually be really interested in your views of what fire might have been in these arid savanna regions before. I think, when I had seen, of course, my experience obviously is limited, even if I've been at Benfontein for 20 years, what is 20 years in the greater scheme of things. But the fires I used to see they would just burn through, and I don't think that a structure like the sociable weaver nest would have evolved if large fires that consumed their nest structures, their nest masses, would be so common as to, on a regular basis, destroying them. So I think maybe yes, fires, yes, but fires that just burn through, and when the trees don't really catch fire. Also, these acacia trees, they don't seem to be terribly resistant to fire. So I must say I am lost, and I mean, yeah, if you have any more specific views on this, I would be really, really interested in hearing them, because I just find it hard to put together fire and evolution of something like a sociable weaver colony, except if they are small fires that just burning the grass and not really the trees. But then now becoming, or the frequency of these more intensive fires now increasing because of the unusually wet summers.
Ruan, I'm going to assume that you raised your hand in response and want to be part of the conversation there, so I'm going to ask you to unmute. Prof. Bond, I also want to mention that if you want to be part of the conversation live, you're most welcome to just indicate with a raised hand, and we'll unmute you immediately. But I'm not going to put you on the spot for it. So.
I just want to add, because I was born in the area, and Benfontein was basically, I mean, well, I'm not that old, but the fires that we spoke of, I can't remember as a child anything even remotely as bad as that. I cannot even remember a time that there was a veld fire. And I agree with you there, Rita. I remember distinctly remember these wonderful, beautiful sociable weaver nests everywhere, not everywhere, but I mean, there were quite a lot of them, but I never remember fires that often, or that large, or that scale. And then just to add to your comment, I also don't ever remember that much rain or grass that long. I mean, it was something. I remember I was home not too long ago, and I was walking through the veld with my mom, and I told her I have never seen the grass this tall before in as long as I can remember, and she can remember. And I mean, she's 60 plus now, and she's been living there for her whole life, and she's never seen it like that. So there's definitely a really quite sudden change in my lifetime. I'm 36, so I mean, in my lifetime, in what the area looks like, and what the exactly what you're explaining, just my little observation of the time that I've spent in the area.
Yeah, thank you. It's very, very nice useful to hear that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruan. I'm going to ask Prof. Bond to unmute and please join the conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, I think Rita gave a very good answer. But we did get a whole lot of big fires in the early 2000s. And I remember debates then about whether these fires were abnormal, how unusual they were. And the answer was that they're not that unusual. You might get, we don't know the frequency. So it might happen once or twice in a century, as it does in Central Australia in their arid lands. Our systems have softer grasses, and I'd expect them to burn more frequently. So I'd say maybe 3 or 4 times or more per century. So you could miss it, Ruan, you know, especially as a young fellow like you. But I think what would be particularly interesting is watching and seeing and observing how the birds respond in such a well-studied system. It'll be fascinating to see how they cope with what I think would be a recurring, but in their lifespans, a rare event. Yeah, so I stick with it by saying grass, dry grass, vast flat areas, lightning strikes, you must get fire. And those trees, I do know some of the studies showing that they're vulnerable. The things to look at would be the juvenile stages and how they respond as well. So it's certainly interesting from the plant point of view as well. But I really look forward to what you pick up on the birds. And thank you for a wonderful talk. Thanks.
Thanks so much, William. Yeah, it's well, yes, definitely we are. I mean, it started a whole new line of investigation how the birds are affected by this. So we, yeah, as I said, we have a first student looking at that, a master student, but we're definitely hoping to get probably a PhD student, and just to continue, and yeah, and other people will be looking at different aspects of that. I just, yeah, I don't know if you could still answer, William, but the grass, I think what the change is here. I mean, I can see the felt fire coming through quickly, frequently, with lightning and and the natural conditions. Of course, these days you also have people throwing cigarette butts from the road, and of course, but I can see that being something that is a natural occurrence. But what my feeling has always been that these grasses burn like through very quickly and not producing a lot of heat, and so not very destructive flames, except in conditions like what we were saying, this exceptionally high biomass after a very high rainfall. Would you confirm that? Do you think that's what should happen normally? It's just very quickly burning through the grass and not even the trees catching fire much?
I think the flame height would certainly be influenced by the biomass. The thing that's usually creates havoc is if you have some invasive grass that produces much more fuel than usual. Okay. And that would be interesting to see if there's some change in grass composition. But I don't know how unusual the rains have been. So, grass fires can certainly burn enough to blast a tree canopy. So you made a good point that this thing wouldn't have evolved if the fires were frequent. Yeah. But I would say that they're probably not frequent, but they do occur.
Yes, yeah. Or at least not the destructive ones being frequent, maybe just the low intensity ones that, okay. Yeah, but the grass composition, I'm making a note actually, because it's something I've been thinking about as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Bond. That was super interesting. I really enjoyed that conversation. Mori, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. So yes, it's just linked to the discussion that's been happening, and when you had said that 7 or 8 of the 15 nests had been destroyed by fire, I kind of immediately thought to myself, why are the birds not building new nests in another tree? Is there a lack of suitable trees for new nests? Because I mean, ultimately, these are weavers. When their cousins, the southernmost weavers' nests get destroyed, they just go and build another one. I know it does take a lot of effort and time and resources, but I would have thought that the cooperation in the group would actually facilitate and assist building a new nest when their last nest had been destroyed. Do they do because I think the cooperation of the group sort of was more around the collecting of food and helping rear young and whatever. But do they also help to build a nest when there's no nest? I mean, in your time of study, have new nests actually been built in that time? That original 15 has maybe one gone and another 2 have appeared elsewhere.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, yeah, that's obviously a very good question as well. So the birds, they can build new nests, and they do, but building a new nest is and it is done cooperatively. So totally, it's not one bird that just goes and goes about it. It's a group of birds that when a new nest is built. In our study area, we've only seen once a new nest appearing. I mean, that we have witnessed from the very beginning. And it was a group of about 15 birds building it, and then others joined. But building a new nest is I mean, it's all the things you said. It's a lot of work. It's so the effort that goes into that is quite a lot, even if the birds can do it quickly. Not all trees. So to give you an example from that one nest that we witnessed them building, we saw them when we first saw it. There was a small pile of grass, and it was about. It was less than a week. There was one like proto chamber, let's call it. It was not like a proper chamber, but it was already something where the birds could roost. So it does take some time to get that structure. Now it's very compact, a sociable weaver nest. So it takes time. It takes a lot of effort, even if several birds are doing it. Not all trees are suitable, as you also pointed out. We probably have several in the area that are suitable, but not all are. And also after a fire, all the grass is burned, so they also don't have the material they need to build a new nest. Of course, then quite quickly the grass starts growing again, but you know, it does take some time for they can't use all types of grass. There's only some types of grass that are suitable to build these nests. So it's complex. There's several factors, and also it's their social structure, because they are, you know, the social weavers do come together as a colony and they move together as a colony, but they are actually territorial about their own nest chamber. That is something they defend from other birds. So to be honest, I don't know how it would start when they start a nest. How do they go about, you know, now this is our chamber, now this is mine, and then you go and build a second one because now I'm taking over this one. So I suspect, you know, that there's some social negotiation that goes on there, that these social factors are probably also relatively complex, and they might not facilitate the process. But yeah, here I'm speculating.
Some more MSc projects to be done.
Yes, we still have a few to go.
No, awesome. I mean, I've also seen pictures and evidence of when the colony becomes too big and it actually causes the whole tree to collapse. Yes. The bough of the tree, and I think also with high winds and heavy rain, etc., can be a factor. So yeah, I mean, as you say, it's very, very complicated and very involved. Lots of moving parts. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.
Okay, then a question from Josephine. Have there been mortalities during live trapping of the sociable weavers?
Yes, the direct answer is yes, and actually it's good that this question is asked, because we always think, so what we use is mist nets, which you know is the standard way of catching birds, and everyone says mist nets are quite safe, and you know there's lots of people, lots of bird ringers. There's people, and it's not only researchers that are using mist nets to catch birds for their studies. There's people doing bird ringing just you know as a hobby, and it does collect useful data that can be used to address important research questions. But this is seen as something that is quite safe, and I mean it is fairly safe. It's not like mortality is high, but yes, we have had birds dying from the falling into the mist nets. What happens is we sometimes have birds that have injuries, so either, well, if it is wing strain, usually we take them into captivity for a few days. They recover. We've had injuries on the legs. They often also recover. But it has happened. It's rare, but it has happened that the birds seem to injure maybe something on the spine, because we see that it's like they lose balance, and then they can't fly. When we have, I mean, we fortunately have conditions to, if we have injured birds, to take them into captivity and look after them and allow them to recover. But we have cases like that where they don't recover. It has happened in a couple of instances that we've had to put birds down, or that they just died in captivity. Also, something that is quite rare but happens is just having a heart attack, really. So we've even done autopsies on some birds, and you see that they have bleeding on the heart. Well, when I say on some birds, we did one. There was one sociable weaver, but we've had colleagues from other studies that found that. So yeah, it's very rare, very low frequency of deaths, but yes, it can happen.
Thanks, Rita. So there's a question from Pilani. He seems to be a little bit critical of your work. Why do you use plastic as prevention of a nest on the stem of a tree? And how long does it take? Pilani, I'm not sure your second question. How long does it take? What does that refer to? You're welcome.
Maybe it's for how long we leave it there. Yes. So we use plastic because it's very effective to prevent the snakes from climbing the trees. They slide down when they're trying to climb. We tried different methods before, and this was the only one that was really effective. So that's why we use it. We use it as an experiment to assess the effects of predation on these birds. There's been various questions that we've been able to address thanks to these protections. So obviously not all trees are protected. It's only a small part, and we usually leave them, and we also we usually leave them during the breeding season or part of the breeding season, and remove them as soon as possible afterwards. So yeah, so that's I don't know if this addresses the questions.
Thanks, Rita. That's another very comprehensive, good answer. I see Andrew got his hand up. So Andrew, please ask your question.
Thanks, Chris. Rita, wonderful talk. Not that I expected anything else, and it's just really special for me after meeting you 25 years ago at Benfontein. We were a PhD student, to see how this research program has just grown and grown. But really fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Just listening to the sort of conversation about fire, and it's a pity William's left. it occurs to me that there's a very interesting and possibly very sobering message here about how these birds might respond to climate change and how their responses might be constrained. And what I'm thinking here is that as climate change advances and the arid zone heats up, the cooler eastern parts of the sociable weavers range, like Benfontein, are possibly going to become more and more important, as they're forced out of the really hot areas by high temperatures. But the worrying thing here is that, the messages coming through here is that those cooler eastern parts of the range are also going to be the parts where fire is likely to be a bigger issue. Because it's those cooler mesic eastern parts of the range where the biomass is higher, where you're going to potentially see more and more frequent, really intensive fires that destroy nests. This is, I think, quite a worrying sort of confluence of events here.
Yeah, Andrew, that's such a good point that you're making. Benfontein and the Kimberley area does have higher rainfall. I mean, as obviously you know, than further west into the Kalahari proper. It can get very hot, although I think maybe not quite as hot as some areas further west and north. But yes, having higher rainfall, it's actually in the end it might not be such a good thing if it continues to fuel fires like this. So I mean, who knows what is going to happen if the trend is, but I do honestly worry about the population at Benfontein. I don't know if I'm witnessing, the decline that will end with extinction. But right now we have 7 colonies. We had 15 2 years ago, and plenty of other colonies in the area that we were not studying because we couldn't do them all. And now we have 7. So and this year they're forecasting an El Nino, so which will be bad for the birds' reproduction. And obviously, as you also know, then you get these. I mean, there's several effects that start to combine, and if we get into these Ali effects, which is for the people who don't know it as well, is basically as groups get smaller and populations get smoller, they have difficulties in surviving and in looking for predators and other things like that, and then that just furthers the decline. And so I think we have a combination of factors here that is not very, very promising, but it's also very unpredictable, so we're just keeping on going and seeing what will happen.
Thanks, Rita.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for your comments. Rita, I don't see, there's another question that just popped up, or a comment from Doug Newman. Is there any value in building artificial structures for more nests? Is there a way that we can contribute, if that landowners can perhaps contribute in this way?
Sociable weavers do take to artificial structures quite readily. I mean, and it's not necessarily a good thing, as people that work for Eskom and Telkom will know, that they can use those structures and really cause problems. But I think it depends on the areas. I think there's still enough trees that the birds can use. We're not, and especially with the species like the sociable weaver, they are at the moment still very, very common. They are suffering at Benfontein, and for sure at other places as well, with fires and a combination of factors. I don't think we need the artificial structures as a conservation measure yet, but we do. Yes, but who knows? And we might. They do use them, and maybe in some situations it might become useful.
Thank you, Rita. Well, we will invite you back in the future to give us an update on this, because this is a story that will need an update in the future. It was interesting to me, perhaps not a scientific observation, but it was interesting how most of the questions seem to go towards the sociable weavers and not so much to the hornbills, which I really expected to be the case. So that's interesting. Maybe it's because we identify with these social structures. So
Yes.
we find
Yes, that it's. I also noticed it's interesting, yeah, that people seem to be more interested in the social weavers.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much. That was a really very interesting evening and very interesting information. Thank you to everybody that stayed in with us. It was very obvious tonight that people were struggling with connectivity. I think the situation with load shedding just influenced that a bit tonight. But it was great to be with all of you, and please join us again next week.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was really nice to have to chat to everyone about all of this.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.